I was 25, standing at my family's golden child celebration, yet handed a toilet cleaning list like hired help. But my grandmother pulled me aside, slipping a sealed envelope into my hand and whispering not to open it inside. 1 hour later, sitting in my car, I read the first line and my heart dropped. I was never an outsider. I was the sole heir. Just wait until you see how they fall. My name is Freya Hughes. I turned 25 years old today. But if you asked any of the 150 well-heeled guests currently sipping champagne in the grand ballroom of my family's estate in Lake Forest, Illinois, they would likely tell you I was the hired help, perhaps the event coordinator, if they were being generous, or simply a maid who had forgotten to wear her uniform if they were being honest. I stood near the periphery of the room, my back pressed against the cool plaster of the wall, watching the spectacle. The room was awash of gold and cream, decorated to within an inch of its life. A massive silk banner was draped across the main staircase. The letters shimmering under the crystal chandelier, it read, in bold, triumphant font, Ethan Hughes, seed round success, the future is now. My brother, Ethan, was the center of the universe. He stood in the middle of a circle of investors and family friends, holding a crystal flute. His face flushed with the easy confidence of a man who has never heard the word no without a safety net attached to it. He was laughing at something a venture capitalist was saying. His head thrown back. He looked golden. He looked like a winner. I looked down at my own hands. They were empty, save for a linen napkin I had instinctively picked up off a side table because a guest had left it there. Old habits died hard, or rather, they were beaten into you until they became muscle memory. Freya. The voice was sharp, cutting through the low hum of jazz and polite conversation like a serrated knife. I turned to see my mother, Carol, standing there. She was impeccable in a silver gown that probably cost more than my entire year's rent in Milwaukee. Her hair was sprayed into a helmet of perfection, not a strand out of place. She did not smile at me. She did not say happy birthday. Instead, she thrust a clipboard into my hands. The catering staff is lagging on the hors d'oeuvres, she said, her eyes scanning the room over my shoulder, looking for anyone more important than me. And someone tracked mud into the guest powder room near the foyer. I need you to handle it, now. I looked at the clipboard. It was a list, a long, detailed list of tasks that belonged to the cleaning crew or the catering manager, not the daughter of the house. Check ice levels, wipe down the bar, ensure the bathroom hand towels are replenished every 20 minutes. Mother, I said, my voice steady, though a familiar cold weight settled in my stomach. I am a guest. I drove 2 hours to be here. She finally looked at me, her gaze withering. You are family, Freya. Family pitches in. Ethan is busy securing our future. The least you can do is ensure his night doesn't smell like a dirty toilet. Do not make a scene. She turned on her heel and walked away before I could respond, vanishing into the crowd to charm a local politician. I stood there, the clipboard heavy in my hand. It was a physical manifestation of my place in this hierarchy. Ethan got the funding, the banner, and the applause. I got the toilet brush. I should have thrown the clipboard on the floor. I should have walked out. But 25 years of conditioning is a powerful thing. It is a heavy chain wrapped around your ankles. So, I did what Freya Hughes always did. I moved to do the work so I could disappear. I spent the next 45 minutes managing the chaos. I directed the servers. I wiped a spilled martini off a mahogany side table before it could stain. And yes, I checked the guest bathroom. When I emerged from the hallway, smoothing my blazer, I felt invisible. It was a superpower I had cultivated out of necessity. I made my way toward the buffet, realizing I had not eaten since breakfast. As I reached for a plate, a voice stopped me. Freya, my goodness, look at you. It was Mrs. Higgins, a neighbor from 3 houses down. She was a kind, fluttery woman who had always given me extra candy on Halloween. She clutched my arm, her face beaming. I was just looking at the date on my phone, she said, loud enough that heads turned. It is the 20th of October, isn't it? Freya, happy birthday. I cannot believe I forgot. 25 today, right? A quarter of a century. I managed a weak smile. Thank you, Mrs. Higgins. It is. Oh, nonsense. Helen. A booming voice interrupted us. My father, Robert, stepped into the circle. He wrapped an arm around Mrs. Higgins's shoulder, jovial and commanding. He did not look at me. He looked at the room, playing to the audience. We are here to celebrate real achievements tonight, my father said, his laugh booming but his eyes cold as flint as they flickered toward me. Ethan is building an empire. Freya here. Well, let us just say she isn't really the real family type like Ethan. She prefers the background. Don't you, Freya? The silence that followed was brief but excruciating. It was a dismissal so casual, so public, that it stripped the skin right off me. Not the real family type. It was the same joke he had been making since I was 7. But tonight, under the lights, it felt final. Mrs. Higgins looked confused, her smile faltering. But, surely. Enjoy the shrimp, Helen, my father said, steering her away. He didn't even wait for me to agree with him. He just erased me. I stood frozen near the shrimp tower. My chest felt tight, like a fist was squeezing my lungs. I needed air. I needed to get away from the noise, the perfume, and the overwhelming stench of hypocrisy. I retreated to the library, a room that was technically off-limits to guests, but was the only place in the house I had ever felt safe. It was dark, smelled of old paper and leather, and most importantly, it was empty, or so I thought. I walked over to the mahogany desk in the corner, where the family mail was usually dumped. I don't know why I looked. Maybe a small, stupid part of me hoped there was something there for me. A card, acknowledgement. The desk was piled high with congratulatory letters for Ethan, thick, creamy envelopes with embossed return addresses from banks and law firms. But buried at the bottom, peeking out like a bruised flower, was a purple envelope. My breath hitched. I knew that handwriting. It was the only handwriting that had ever mattered. I pulled it out. It was a birthday card. But the flap was torn. Someone had already opened it. I stared at the ragged edge of the paper. They had checked it. My parents had checked my birthday card, likely to see if there was a check inside. And when they found only paper, they had tossed it to the bottom of the pile beneath Ethan's glory. I pulled the card out. It was simple. Purple cardstock. The message inside was written in shaky but elegant cursive. The truth does not sleep, my darling, and neither should you. That was it. No happy birthday. No love, Grandma. Just that cryptic, haunting phrase she had whispered to me for years. I told them not to touch that. I spun around, nearly dropping the card. Sitting in the high-backed wing chair in the darkest corner of the room was my grandmother. Marjorie Caldwell. I had not seen her in the shadows. She was dressed in black, a stark contrast to the festive colors of the party. Her silver hair was pulled back severely, and her hands rested on the head of her cane. She looked like a statue carved from judgment. "Grandma," I breathed out. "I didn't see you." "They see what they want to see," she said, her voice raspy but strong. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking through the open door, out toward the noise of the party where her son-in-law, my father, was holding court. And they ignore what they fear. "Why did they open my mail?" I asked, the anger finally bubbling up, hot and acrid in my throat. Marjorie turned her head slowly, her eyes locking onto mine. They were sharp, intelligent eyes, unclouded by age. "Because they are scavengers, Freya, and scavengers are always hungry." She stood up, leaning heavily on her cane. The sound of the wood hitting the floorboards echoed in the silence. Thud, step, thud, step. "Come," she said. "The show is about to start." "I don't want to go back out there," I whispered. "Dad," he said. "I heard what he said." Marjorie cut me off. "Robert has a big mouth and a small mind. A dangerous combination. But tonight, he is going to say something that will cost him everything, and I want you to witness it." I didn't understand. but I obeyed. I always obeyed Marjorie. She was the only person in this house who looked at me and saw a human being. We walked back out to the ballroom. The atmosphere had shifted. The music had stopped. My father was standing on the raised platform near the staircase, tapping a spoon against his glass. The sharp ding, ding, ding silenced the crowd. Ethan stood next to him, beaming, looking like a prince about to be crowned. My mother was slightly behind them, looking at the crowd with a predatory satisfaction. "Friends, family, distinguished guests," my father began, his voice amplified by the acoustics of the room. "Thank you for being here to celebrate Ethan. This seed funding is just the beginning. It is proof that the Hughes name stands for innovation and leadership." There was polite applause. My father held up a hand to quiet them. "But great ventures require great commitment," he continued, his voice dropping to a serious, somber register that he used when he was selling something. "To ensure that Ethan has the runway he needs to change the world with his company. Carol and I have made a decision. We are going all in." He paused for effect. "We have decided to sell this estate." A gasp rippled through the room. I froze. The house? This house in Lake Forest had been the family seat for 3 generations. It was massive, historical, and priceless. "We will be listing the property next week," my father announced, his chest puffing out. "We will downsize to a condo in the city. This house is just brick and mortar. The future is Ethan. And we are liquidating this asset to pour every single penny into his vision." Ethan looked shocked but thrilled. He hugged my father. The crowd began to clap, murmuring about the nobility of the sacrifice. Thud. The sound of the cane hitting the floor was louder than the applause. "Robert!" It wasn't a shout. It was a command. My grandmother stood at the edge of the crowd, her small frame suddenly looming larger than anyone else in the room. The room went dead silent. You could hear the ice melting in the buckets. My father's smile faltered. He looked down at her, annoyance flickering in his eyes. "Mother Caldwell, we are in the middle of a toast. We can discuss this." "You will discuss nothing," Marjorie said. Her voice carried to the back of the room without a microphone. "You speak of selling this house as if it is yours to sell." "Of course it is mine," my father laughed nervously, glancing at the guests. "It has been our home for 25 years. Occupancy is not ownership." "Robert," she said. The words hung in the air like smoke. "And theft is not a legacy." My mother stepped forward, her face pale. "Mother, please, you are tired. Let's get you to bed. You are confused." Marjorie ignored her daughter completely. She turned her back on the stage, on the banner, on the golden boy Ethan. She turned to me. "Freya," she said loudly, "attend to me." The crowd parted. I felt 500 eyes burning into my skin. I walked toward her, my legs feeling like lead. "Take me to the garden," she said. "The air in here is stale with lies." I took her arm. We walked out through the French doors, leaving the stunned silence of the ballroom behind us. The night air was crisp, biting with the chill of late October. We walked to the stone bench near the rose garden, the place where she used to read to me when I was small. Marjorie sat down and let out a long, shuddering breath. She looked old then, older than I had ever seen her, as if the anger was the only thing holding her upright. And now that she had spent it, she was fading. "Grandma?" I asked, kneeling beside her. "What was that? You can't just tell Dad he doesn't own the house. His name is on the deed, isn't it?" Marjorie reached into the pocket of her heavy cardigan. Her hand was trembling, but her grip was firm. She pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. It was sealed with red wax, stamped with an insignia I recognized from the billboards downtown. Hawthorne and Briggs, the most expensive, ruthless estate law firm in Chicago. She pressed it into my hand. It felt warm from her body heat. "Robert thinks he is playing chess," she whispered, leaning close to my ear. "But he has been playing solitaire with a deck I marked 25 years ago." I looked down at the envelope. It had my name on it. Freya Hughes. "What is this?" I asked. "This," she said, her eyes intense, "is the reason they hate you, and it is the reason they can never touch you again." She gripped my hand over the envelope. "Do not open it here, Freya. Not in this house. Not where they can see. Go to your car. Drive to the lake. Read it alone. Grandma, you're scaring me." "Good," she said. "Fear makes you sharp. Now go, before they come out here to spin their webs." I stood up, the envelope feeling like a live coal in my hand. I looked at the house, glowing with warm light, the silhouette of my family visible through the glass doors. They were probably already laughing it off, calling Marjorie senile, pouring more wine. I turned and ran. I didn't stop until I reached my beat-up sedan, parked at the very end of the long driveway. Hidden behind the caterers' vans, I climbed inside and locked the doors. My breath was coming in short, white puffs in the cold car. I turned on the dome light. I looked at the red wax seal. Hawthorne Briggs. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely slide my finger under the flap. The paper tore with a sharp sound that seemed too loud in the quiet night. I pulled out the documents. I didn't understand the legal jargon at first, the whereas and hereby clauses. But then my eyes fell on the first paragraph of the cover letter. I read it. Then I read it again. My heart felt like it dropped out of my chest and smashed onto the floor mats. "Dear Ms. Hughes, per the instructions of the Marjorie Caldwell Irrevocable Trust, dated October 20th, 2000, we are pleased to inform you that upon your 25th birthday, the blackout period has ended. You were never a dependent. You are the sole beneficiary." I looked up at the house through my windshield. The banner for Ethan was still shining. My father was still toasting to a sale he thought was inevitable. They had treated me like a ghost in my own home for a quarter of a century. I gripped the steering wheel, the paper crinkling in my fist. A strange, cold calm washed over me, replacing the fear. I wasn't the help. I wasn't the mistake. I was the landlord, and eviction day was coming. The engine of my car had gone cold, but I remained sitting there in the dark, clutching the papers that proved my entire life had been a carefully constructed lie. The revelation that I was the owner of the estate did not bring a rush of triumph. Not yet. Instead, it acted as a key, unlocking a heavy rusted door in my memory that I had kept bolted shut for years. It forced me to look back at the architecture of my childhood, to examine the foundation of cruelty that my parents had built brick by brick, while I, the foolish child, had tried to call it a home. I was 7 or perhaps 8 years old when I first understood that there was a designated hierarchy in the Hughes household, and I was not merely at the bottom of it. I was underneath the floorboards. It was a Tuesday evening, raining hard enough that the sound of water hammered against the roof like stones. My father, Robert, was in his study with a colleague. The door cracked open just an inch. I had approached to show him a drawing I had made at school, a crude crayon depiction of our house with 4 stick figures standing in front of it holding hands. I heard his voice, low and dismissive, drifting into the hallway. The colleague had asked about the expenses of raising 2 children in private school. "Ethan is an investment," my father had said, the ice in his glass clinking. "The boy has the spark. He is the legacy. Freya? Freya is just a charity case we keep around for appearances, a tax write-off in pigtails. Do not confuse a guest with the real family." I had dropped my hand then. The drawing fluttered to the floor. I did not pick it up. I walked back to my room, the phrase charity case rolling around in my young mind. I did not know what it meant financially, but I knew what it felt like emotionally. It felt like I was a piece of furniture that they regretted buying but were too lazy to return. From that day forward, the divide became a canyon. It was most visible in the geography of the house itself. Ethan was given the corner suite on the 2nd floor, a room flooded with natural light, boasting a view of the lake and an ensuite bathroom with a clawfoot tub. My room was down the hall, a converted sewing room that looked out over the driveway and the garbage cans. It was drafty in the winter and stifling in the summer. But I never complained. I thought that if I complained, they might realize I was taking up space and remove me entirely. Birthdays were the annual reminder of my status. For Ethan, a birthday was a coronation. When he turned 10, my parents hired a magician and a pony, and the entire backyard was transformed into a carnival. He received mountains of gifts, video game consoles, designer sneakers, remote-controlled helicopters. I remembered watching him tear through the wrapping paper, his face flushed with the expectation of receiving. My birthdays were different. They were quiet, almost apologetic affairs, as if my aging was an inconvenience they had to schedule around. I remember my 10th birthday clearly because it was the day I learned that my labor was the price of my existence. There was no party. There was a dinner, but it was a business dinner for my father's partners. My mother had come into my room at 4 p.m, handing me an apron that was too big for me. "We are short-handed tonight," she had said, not making eye contact. "I need you to help wash the crystal. Be careful. If you break one, it comes out of your allowance for the next 5 years." So, while Ethan sat at the table laughing with the adults, eating steak and potato gratin, I stood on a stool at the kitchen sink, my hands red and raw in the scalding soapy water, scrubbing wine glasses until they squeaked. When the cake was served, a store-bought sheet cake that they had forgotten to put candles on, I was allowed to come out and have a slice. I remembered asking, quietly, if I could open my present. My father had looked at me over the rim of his glass, his eyes bored. "You have a roof over your head. Freya, you have food in your belly. That is your present. You should learn your place and be grateful for it." Know your place. That phrase became the soundtrack of my adolescence. When we turned 16, the disparity shifted from toys to symbols of adulthood. For months leading up to Ethan's 16th birthday, the house buzzed with secrets. On the morning of his birthday, my father led him out to the driveway, covering his eyes. There, gleaming in the morning sun, was a brand new sports sedan. It was cherry red, aggressive, and expensive. Ethan screamed with joy, jumping into the driver's seat while my mother took photos, clapping her hands like a proud seal. "He needs a reliable vehicle to get to his internships," my father reasoned to the neighbors, beaming. Success starts with the right image. 6 months later, I turned 16. I did not expect a car. I was realistic. I hoped, perhaps, for a driving lesson, or maybe a contribution toward the used clunker I had been saving my babysitting money for. I came home from school to find a box on the kitchen counter. It was a cake from the local supermarket discount rack. I knew it was the discount rack because the icing was slightly smashed against the plastic lid. It read, "Happy birthday, Frida." They hadn't even checked the spelling. "Where is Mom?" I asked the empty kitchen. A note was stuck to the fridge. "Dad and I took Ethan to his rowing tournament. Leftover lasagna in the fridge. Happy birthday." I ate the lasagna cold because I didn't want to make noise using the microwave. I stared at the cake that said, "Frida and I didn't cry." I think I had run out of tears by then. I just corrected the name with my finger, wiping away the I and the D, licking the sugary frosting off my skin. It tasted like chemicals and loneliness. High school graduation was the final nail in the coffin of my expectations. Ethan graduated with a solid B average, and my parents treated it like he had won a Nobel Prize. They gifted him a 6-week tour of Europe. They paid for his hostels, his train passes, and gave him a generous spending card so he could soak up the culture. I graduated top of my class, valedictorian. I gave a speech about resilience that the local paper quoted. After the ceremony, my parents gave me a quick, stiff hug near the parking lot while looking over my shoulder to wave at the principal. "Well done," my father said, checking his watch. "We have to get Ethan to the airport. Don't expect a trip. Freya, we have spent a fortune this year. Don't be greedy. You have your scholarship. Don't you? That is reward enough. Don't be greedy," as if asking for love was a form of avarice. Holidays were an exercise in invisibility. While the real family sat in the living room opening gifts or watching football, I was the shadow in the periphery. I became an expert at reading the room's needs before they were spoken. I knew when a wine glass was empty. I knew when the trash needed to be taken out. I would move silently among the guests, collecting dirty napkins and empty plates. A ghost in a velvet dress. Guests would sometimes smile at me pitifully and say, "Oh, Freya, sit down, relax." But I would catch my mother's eye from across the room, a sharp, warning glare that said, "Keep moving," and I would smile back and say, "I actually enjoy staying busy." That was the lie I told so often I almost started to believe it. The only crack in this wall of coldness came from my grandmother, Marjorie. She was a woman of few words and terrifying stillness, but she saw everything. She never intervened directly in the yelling matches or the blatant favoritism, which used to confuse and hurt me. Why did she let them treat me this way? But she had her own way of fighting. On every single one of my birthdays, without fail, a thick purple envelope would arrive. It was never handed to me in front of my parents. It would appear under my pillow, or tucked into my school bag, or hidden inside my winter boots. The cards were always high quality, the paper thick and textured like fabric, and inside, in her looping, archaic script, she would write the same message. "The truth does not sleep." Sometimes she would add a $100 bill, instructing me to hide it. "For the escape fund," she would whisper when she passed me in the hall, winking. I didn't understand what she meant by the truth. I thought she meant God, or karma, or some abstract concept of justice. I didn't know she meant a legal document sitting in a vault in Chicago. There was one specific afternoon when I was about 14 that should have tipped me off, had I been bold enough to press the issue. I was in the front yard, raking leaves, another chore Ethan was exempt from because of his allergies, when Mrs. Gable from next door stopped by to walk her poodle. She leaned over the fence, watching me work. "You are such a hard worker, Freya," she said kindly. "Just like your grandmother. She was a force of nature when she bought this place." I paused, leaning on the rake. "You mean when my dad bought this place?" Mrs. Gable frowned, tilting her head. "No, dear. Marjorie bought this estate. Cash. If I recall the gossip correctly, before your parents even moved back from the city. She wanted a place for—" She trailed off, her eyes widening as if she had said too much. At that moment, my mother came storming out of the front door, her heels clicking aggressively on the pavement. She must have been watching from the window. "Mrs. Gable?" my mother chirped, her voice tight and high. "So lovely to see you, Freya. Stop bothering the neighbors and finish the leaves." "She wasn't bothering me," Mrs. Gable said. "We were just talking about the history of the house." My mother's face went rigid. A look of pure, unadulterated panic flashed across her features before she masked it with a brittle smile. "Oh, ancient history, boring details. Come inside. Freya, now." She grabbed my arm with a grip that left bruises, dragging me toward the porch. "Don't listen to that senile old woman," she hissed at me once we were inside. "She confuses her medication," but I saw the fear. It was a living thing in her eyes. I learned to survive by becoming small. I perfected the art of the gray rock method before I even knew the psychological term for it. I became uninteresting. I became compliant. I did well in school not to earn their praise, which I knew would never come, but to ensure I could get a scholarship and leave. I kept my room tidy so they had no reason to enter it. I ate less so they couldn't accuse me of taking too much food. I never asked for clothes, money, or affection. I thought that if I asked for nothing, they couldn't hurt me. I thought that if I demanded zero space, they would stop trying to push me out of existence. But sitting in my car now, at 25, tracing the seal of the law firm on the papers in my lap, I realized how wrong I had been. The pain that sat like a stone in my chest wasn't because I wore secondhand clothes while Ethan wore designer brands. It wasn't because I drove a rusted sedan while he drove a sports car. It wasn't about the material things. The pain came from the realization that for my entire life, I had been auditing for the role of daughter, and they had never intended to cast me. I had broken my back trying to earn a seat at a table where my chair had been burned 25 years ago. They had not just deprived me of money, they had deprived me of the fundamental human right to belong. They had looked at a child and decided she was an interloper in her own home, but as I looked down at the trust document, at the clear, undeniable legal proof of my ownership, a new feeling began to displace the sorrow. It was colder than the grief. It was sharper than the anger. It was clarity. They had spent 2 decades telling me I wasn't real family. They had spent years treating me like a guest who had overstayed her welcome. Well, the guest was gone. The landlord was here, and she had a very long memory. I left home the morning after I turned 22. There was no dramatic exit, no screaming match in the foyer, and certainly no tearful goodbye. I simply waited until my parents had left for their country club brunch, and Ethan was still asleep, hungover from whatever celebration he had enjoyed the night before. I packed 2 suitcases with everything I owned, which wasn't much, and loaded them into my rusting sedan. I left my key on the kitchen counter next to the fruit bowl. I did not leave a note. I drove north, crossing the state line into Wisconsin, watching the landscape shift from the manicured, oppressive perfection of Lake Forest to the industrial grit of Milwaukee. I had found a studio apartment in a neighborhood that real estate agents politely described as up and coming. It was 450 square feet of laminate flooring and drafty windows, but when I turned the key in the lock that first night, the silence that greeted me was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. It was mine. The air smelled of stale coffee and dust, not judgment. For the last 3 years, that studio has been my fortress. I built a life there that had nothing to do with the Hughes family name. I got a job as a risk control specialist at Larkstone Supply Group, a logistics and warehousing company on the outskirts of the city. It was unglamorous work. I spent my days analyzing spreadsheets, auditing safety protocols for forklift operators, and calculating the statistical probability of structural failure in pallet racking systems. It fit me perfectly. My entire childhood had been an exercise in risk management. I had spent 2 decades walking on eggshells, predicting the volatile moods of my parents, and assessing the danger levels of a room before I even entered it. Doing it for a paycheck felt like a natural evolution. I was good at it. I was meticulous. I caught errors that men with twice my salary missed because they were too arrogant to double-check their work. I lived a life of quiet, disciplined frugality. I paid my student loans on the 28th of every month. I shopped at discount grocery stores, meal prepping rice and beans on Sundays to last the week. I had 1 good suit for work and 1 pair of sensible boots for the Wisconsin winter. I didn't take vacations. I didn't go out for cocktails. I was saving every spare dollar, building a safety net so thick that I would never, ever have to ask my father for a cent. Meanwhile, my phone provided a window into a parallel universe. I had muted my family's notifications, but occasionally, curiosity got the better of me. I would see Ethan's Instagram stories. There he was in Tulum, holding a bottle of tequila that cost more than my car. There he was in a VIP box at a Bulls game. There was my mother, posting photos of my successful son, with captions full of heart emojis. They looked like royalty. I looked like a ghost who had haunted them and then moved on. Then came the text message. It arrived 3 days ago, appearing on my screen while I was in the middle of a safety audit at a distribution center in Kenosha. I was wearing a hard hat and a high-visibility vest, holding a clipboard, when the phone buzzed in my pocket. Mother. Ethan's seed round celebration is this Saturday. Big investors coming. We need a full family front. Be here by 4. Don't bring that awful coat you wore last Christmas. And don't make it about you. I stared at the screen. Saturday was October 20th, my birthday. There was no mention of it, not a single word. They wanted me there as a prop. They needed the visual of a supportive sister to round out the tableau of the perfect American family. I was just texture for Ethan's portrait. I was about to type a refusal. I was about to tell her that I had plans, that I was working, that I had literally anything else to do. But before I could hit send, my phone rang. The caller ID made my breath catch. Grandma Caldwell. She never called my cell. She hated cell phones. She said they were devices for people who were afraid of being alone with their thoughts. If she wanted to talk, she sent a letter. If she was calling, it was an emergency. I ducked into a quiet corridor between two rows of towering shelves. "Grandma?" "Freya." Her voice came through the line. It sounded thinner than I remembered, like paper that had been folded too many times. But the steel underneath was still there. "Are you coming on Saturday?" "I don't think so," I said, leaning my head against the cold metal of a shelving unit. "Mom just texted. They just want me to play the part of the doting sister. It is my birthday. Grandma, I don't want to spend it watching Ethan get worshipped." There was a pause on the line. I heard her take a breath, a ragged sound that worried me. "You must come," she said. It wasn't a request. "I need you here." "Why?" I asked. "You know how they treat me." "Because I have been preparing for this day for 25 years, she said. The intensity in her voice sent a shiver down my spine. "Right there in the middle of the warehouse. There is something I have to give you, but you must listen to me carefully. Freya, you must follow my instructions exactly." "Okay," I said slowly. "I am listening. I am going to give you an envelope," she said. "When I give it to you, you must not open it in the house. You must not let your father see it. You must not let your mother touch it. Do you understand? It is for your eyes only. If they see what is inside before you do, they will try to destroy it." "Grandma, what is going on?" I asked, my risk assessment brain suddenly firing on all cylinders. "Is this about the will? Are you sick?" "The truth does not sleep," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Come home, Freya. One last time. Come home so you can finally leave." The line went dead. I stood there in the warehouse for a long time, staring at the concrete floor. My grandmother was not a woman given to drama. If she said it was important, it was critical. I texted my mother back 2 words. "I'll be there." I drove down on Saturday morning. The trip from Milwaukee to Lake Forest took just over an hour, but it felt like I was driving backward in time. As I crossed the border into Illinois, the knot in my stomach tightened. I turned off the highway and navigated the winding, tree-lined streets of Lake Forest. The houses here were not just homes. They were statements, massive brick colonials, sprawling Tudors, gates that cost more than most people's annual salaries. I pulled up to the iron gates of my childhood home. It was a stunning property, a 3-story Georgian mansion sitting on 2 acres of manicured lawn near the lake. It looked impeccable. The hedges were trimmed to geometric perfection. The fountain in the center of the circular driveway was bubbling cheerfully. But as I drove my battered sedan up the driveway, passing a row of leased luxury cars, a Mercedes for my dad, a Range Rover for my mom, a Porsche for Ethan, I felt that familiar wave of inadequacy wash over me. I parked at the very end of the driveway, tucking my car behind a delivery van so it wouldn't ruin the aesthetic, as my father liked to say. I grabbed my bag, a sturdy, practical leather tote I had bought at an outlet store, and walked to the front door. I didn't even have to knock. My mother opened the door before I reached the step. She didn't hug me. She didn't say hello. She looked at my shoes. "At least you polished them," she said. "Come inside. The caterers are setting up in the kitchen and they are making a mess. I need you to supervise them." "Hello to you too." "Mother?" I said, stepping into the foyer. The house smelled of lilies and expensive floor wax. It was breathtakingly beautiful, but it felt cold, like a museum where you weren't allowed to touch the exhibits. "Don't be snippy," she said, checking her reflection in the hallway mirror. "Ethan is upstairs getting dressed. Dad is in the study on a call with the bank. Just try to be useful. Freya, we have 150 people arriving in 3 hours. This is the most important night of your brother's life." "And happy birthday to me," I muttered under my breath. "What?" she snapped, turning around. "Nothing," I said. "I will go check on the kitchen." I walked through the house, the ghost of my younger self walking beside me. Every corner held a memory of exclusion. The dining room table where I wasn't allowed to sit during important dinners. The living room rug where I was scolded for reading because it looked messy. I found my father in the hallway outside the library. He was pacing, his phone pressed to his ear. He looked stressed, his face was red, and he was sweating slightly despite the cool air conditioning. "I told you, the liquidity is coming," he was saying into the phone, his voice hushed but aggressive. "The asset is prime. We are listing it next week. Yes, yes, the bridge loan just needs to cover us until the closing. I guarantee it." He stopped when he saw me. He hung up the phone abruptly, sliding it into his pocket. "Freya," he said. He didn't smile. He looked at me with a strange mixture of annoyance and, was that fear? "Hi, Dad," I said. His eyes darted to my tote bag. He stared at it for a second too long. "What is in the bag?" "My clothes," I said, confused. "And my toiletries. I am staying the night. Remember?" Right, he said, wiping his forehead with a handkerchief. "Just don't leave it lying around. We want the house to look staged. Clean lines, no clutter." "I will take it to my room," I said. "Actually," he said, blocking my path slightly. "Use the guest room in the back, the small one near the laundry. We are using your old room to store the coats." Of course they were. My childhood bedroom was now a coat check. "Fine," I said. He looked at my bag again. "You didn't bring any paperwork, did you?" I frowned. "Paperwork? What kind of paperwork?" "Nothing," he said quickly, waving his hand. "Just work stuff. Don't do work tonight. We need you focused on the guests." He walked away, heading toward the kitchen, leaving a trail of nervous energy in his wake. I stood there, gripping the strap of my bag. That was odd. My father never cared about my work. He didn't even know what I did. Why would he be worried about me bringing paperwork? And what was that on the phone about a bridge loan and listing the asset? I went to the back guest room, a cramped space that used to be the servants' quarters in the 1920s, and dropped my bag. I sat on the edge of the narrow bed and took a deep breath. Something was wrong. The air in the house felt tight, vibrating with tension. My father was scrambling for money. My mother was manic about appearances. Ethan was the golden calf they were worshipping, but the pedestal looked shaky. I thought about what Grandma had said on the phone. I have been preparing for this day for 25 years. I thought about my father's conversation, listing the asset. They were going to sell the house. That much was obvious. They were leveraging everything to fund Ethan's startup. They were betting the farm, quite literally. But why was my father so paranoid about my bag? Why did he look at me as if I were a subpoena walking on two legs? I stood up and walked to the small window. I looked out at the garden. I saw my grandmother sitting on the stone bench, alone, wrapped in a shawl. She was staring at the house. She wasn't moving. I realized then that I wasn't just here to be a maid. I wasn't just here to fill a quota. I was the variable they hadn't accounted for in their equation. I checked my watch. It was 1 o'clock in the afternoon. The party started at 5. I had 4 hours to kill. 4 hours to be the good little soldier. To wipe counters and arrange flowers and pretend I didn't exist. I smoothed my skirt, put on my customer service face, the mask I wore when I had to tell a warehouse manager his safety protocols were illegal, and stepped out into the hallway. They thought they were using me. They thought I was the background character in Ethan's hero journey. But as I walked toward the kitchen to take orders from my mother, I couldn't shake the feeling that the ground beneath this house was shifting. My father was terrified of something, and whatever it was. My grandmother held the other half of the secret. I grabbed the cleaning list my mother had left on the counter. Item 1. Scrub the guest toilet. I picked up the brush. I would scrub their toilet. I would serve their drinks. I would play their game for a few more hours. Because if my instincts as a risk assessor were right, the crash wasn't just possible, it was imminent, and I needed to be the one standing clear when the structure came down. By 5 o'clock, the house had completed its transformation from a family home into a stage set for my father's ambitions. The string quartet had arrived and was setting up in the foyer, tuning their cellos and violins with a dissonance that set my teeth on edge. The catering staff, a battalion of young men and women in crisp white shirts, moved with military precision, carrying trays of smoked salmon blinis and truffle-infused deviled eggs. I stood near the entrance to the kitchen, wearing the black dress I had worn to my college graduation, the only formal thing I owned that was understated enough to blend into the upholstery. I wasn't technically working, but I wasn't really a guest either. I was in the gray zone, the liminal space reserved for poor relations and inconvenient truths. The doorbell began to ring, a constant, melodic chime that signaled the arrival of the Lake Forest elite. They flowed in like a tide of cashmere and old money, their laughter echoing off the marble floors. I watched my parents greet them. My mother was radiant, her smile fixed and dazzling, her hand resting possessively on Ethan's arm. Ethan looked the part of the conquering hero, nodding graciously as men twice his age clapped him on the shoulder. My father was the ringmaster. He moved through the crowd with a manic energy, shaking hands, pouring drinks, and guiding the conversation toward one singular topic: the brilliance of his son. Seed funding secured in record time, I heard him boast to a man I recognized as the president of the local bank. Ethan has the Midas touch. Just like his grandfather, I stood still, hoping to remain invisible, but the physics of a crowded room eventually worked against me. About an hour into the cocktail reception, a woman detached herself from a cluster of guests and drifted toward the buffet table where I was pretending to inspect a floral arrangement. It was Aunt Sarah, my mother's cousin. She was a woman who meant well but possessed the social awareness of a sledgehammer. "Freya!" she exclaimed, her voice carrying over the polite murmur of the crowd. She held a glass of Chardonnay in one hand and a napkin in the other. "I didn't see you there. You are blending right into the drapes, dear." "Hello, Aunt Sarah," I said, forcing a smile. "I was just looking at the calendar on my phone this morning," she said, leaning in, her breath smelling of oaky wine. "Today is the big 2-5 for you, isn't it? I can't believe Robert and Carol combined the parties. It seems a bit unfair to overshadow your quarter-century milestone with a business announcement." Before I could answer, before I could tell her that there was no combining of parties, only the erasure of one, my father appeared. He had a radar for any conversation that wasn't centering on Ethan. "Sarah," my father said, sliding his arm around her shoulders, "I hope you are enjoying the wine. It is a vintage I saved specifically for tonight." "I was just wishing Freya a happy birthday," Aunt Sarah said, patting my arm. "I was saying it is a shame she doesn't have a banner too." The air around us seemed to drop 10 degrees. My father's smile didn't waver, but his eyes went flat, dead sharks swimming in a sea of blue. He looked at me, then back at Sarah, with a look of patronizing patience. "Freya understands the bigger picture," my father said smoothly. "Ethan is securing the legacy. Freya, well, she has always been more comfortable in the background. She is not really built for the spotlight." "But 25 is a big year," Sarah insisted, clearly missing the warning signs. "It is the year you really come into your own family heritage." My father laughed. A short, sharp bark of sound. "Family heritage? Let's not get carried away. Sarah, Freya is a Hughes, sure, but she doesn't carry the real Caldwell name, not in spirit. Anyway." The comment hung there, suspended in the noise of the party. I felt the blood drain from my face. Caldwell. That was my grandmother's maiden name. It was the name associated with the old money, the original purchase of the estate, the trust funds and the power. My father was a Hughes. He had married into the Caldwell money. By saying I didn't carry the real Caldwell name, he wasn't just insulting me, he was implying a separation of bloodlines, a distinction of worth that went deeper than just favoritism. He was implying I was genetically incapable of the greatness he believed he had married into. Aunt Sarah blinked, finally sensing she had stepped on a landmine. "Oh, well, I see." "Enjoy the party," Sarah, my father said, dismissing her with a turn of his shoulder. He didn't look at me again. He walked away to refill a senator's glass. I stood there, frozen. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. It wasn't just that he preferred Ethan. It was that he actively disassociated me from the source of the family's prestige. I didn't have time to process the hurt. A hand clamped around my upper arm, the nails digging into my flesh through the fabric of my dress. "Kitchen," my mother hissed in my ear. "Now." She steered me through the swinging doors into the chaotic heat of the kitchen, away from the prying eyes of the guests. The noise of the party was instantly muffled, replaced by the clatter of pots and the shouting of the head chef. My mother shoved me toward the pantry door, her face contorted with a rage that she had been suppressing under her socialite mask. "What are you doing?" she demanded, her voice a low, trembling whisper. "Are you trying to solicit pity? Oh, poor Freya. It is her birthday. Pay attention to her." "I didn't say anything," I said, pulling my arm from her grip. Aunt Sarah came to me. "You stand there looking like a victim," my mother spat. "It is pathetic. This is Ethan's night. Do not make a scene. Do not make me ashamed of you. You are here to support, not to suck the energy out of the room." The door swung open again, and Ethan walked in. He was holding an empty glass, looking flushed and happy. He didn't seem to notice the thick tension in the room, or if he did, he didn't care. "Mom, the investors are asking for you," Ethan said, breezing past me to grab a bottle of water from the fridge. He looked at me, then at my mother. "Freya, we are out of the crab cakes on the east side of the room. Can you run a tray out?" He said it so casually. "Can you run a tray out?" Not happy birthday, not how have you been, to him. I was a utility. I was an NPC in the video game of his life, existing solely to facilitate his quest. "Ethan," I said, my voice steady despite the shaking of my hands. "I am not the caterer." He laughed, unscrewing the cap of his water. I know, but you are good at logistics, right? That is your whole thing. Risk control, organizing, cleaning up messes. It is your natural role. Frey. You love it." He took a swig of water, winked at me, and walked back out to the party. My mother smoothed her dress, taking a deep breath to reset her features into a pleasant mask. "You heard your brother. Make yourself useful, or go sit in the car. I don't care. Just stay out of the way." She followed Ethan, leaving me standing alone next to a stack of dirty plates. I didn't take the crab cakes. I didn't go to the car. I walked back out into the ballroom. But I stayed in the shadows of the staircase, partially hidden by a large potted fern. I needed to see this through. I needed to witness the climax of their delusion. 10 minutes later, the music stopped. My father ascended the first 3 steps of the grand staircase, tapping a spoon against a crystal flute. The sound was sharp and commanding. The room fell silent, 150 faces turning upward to look at him. "Thank you all for coming," my father began, his voice booming with theatrical gratitude. "Tonight, we celebrate not just a seed round, but the future of the Hughes family. Ethan has shown us what vision looks like." He gestured to Ethan, who stood at the bottom of the stairs, looking humble in that practiced, arrogant way. "But vision requires capital," my father continued, his expression turning serious. "And belief requires skin in the game. That is why Carol and I have made a decision. We believe in Ethan's future so much that we are restructuring our entire life to support it." He paused, letting the drama build. "We will be selling this estate," he announced. The murmur that went through the crowd was audible. This house was a landmark. It was a symbol of old Lake Forest wealth. "We are moving to a condo in the city," my father said, waving a hand as if the mansion were a trivial thing he was happy to discard. "We are liquidating the asset to provide the full capital injection Ethan needs to open his headquarters, because that is what real family does. We sacrifice for the heir. We build the future." The guests applauded politely, though I saw some confused glances. Selling the family seat was a desperate move. No matter how he spun it. Whose asset? The voice was not loud, but it cut through the applause like a razor blade. My grandmother, Marjorie Caldwell, stood up from her chair in the corner. She used her cane to push herself to a standing position. She looked tiny in the vast room, but she commanded a gravity that my father could never buy. The applause died out instantly. "Mother Caldwell," my father said, his smile tightening, "we are in the middle of a speech." "I heard the speech," Marjorie said, taking a slow step forward. "You said you are selling the asset. I am asking you simply which asset you are referring to, because you cannot sell what you do not own." My father laughed, a nervous, jagged sound. "This is hardly the time for technicalities. Marjorie, we can discuss the details later." "There are no details to discuss," she said. She turned to look at the crowd, her eyes scanning the room until they found me in the shadows of the fern. "Freya," she called out. I stepped forward. I had no choice. The room parted for me, creating a corridor of silence. I walked toward her, feeling the weight of every gaze, the pity, the curiosity, the judgment. My grandmother reached into her cardigan and pulled out the red-sealed envelope. "Take this," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. I took it. "Go to the garden," she commanded. "Read it, then decide." "Decide what?" my father asked, his voice losing its polish, an edge of panic creeping in. "Mother, give me that. What are you doing?" Marjorie ignored him. She looked at me, her eyes locking onto mine with a ferocity that frightened me. "Do not react with emotion. Freya, read the document, understand your position, and then come back and tell us who this house belongs to." She pushed me gently toward the French doors. I walked. I could feel my father starting to move toward me, but the sheer shock of the moment held him back. I stepped out into the night air, the heavy velvet curtains closing behind me, muffling the sudden explosion of whispers that erupted in the ballroom. I walked to the stone bench, but I couldn't sit. My adrenaline was spiking, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I walked past the garden, down the gravel path, all the way to my car parked in the darkness. I sat in the driver's seat and turned on the overhead light. My hands were trembling so violently I almost dropped the envelope. I broke the seal. I read the cover letter. Then I read the trust document. Then I read the deed transfer. The silence in the car was deafening. Sole beneficiary, irrevocable trust, effective date, October 20th. I looked up at the house. It was glowing in the night, a beacon of wealth and power. My father was inside, selling it to fund his golden boy's ego. My mother was inside, terrified of losing her status. Ethan was inside, assuming the world would always pay his tab. They were actors in a play. They had been reciting lines from a script they thought they had written. Freya is the help. Ethan is the prince. Robert is the king. But the script was a lie. The stage didn't belong to them. The theater didn't belong to them. I looked at the signature at the bottom of the deed, Marjorie Caldwell, trustee, and below it, the new owner's name, waiting for my signature to acknowledge receipt. I wasn't just walking out of a party, I was walking out of 25 years of gaslighting. I wiped a single tear from my cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness. It was the last drop of the old Freya leaving my body. I reached for the door handle. It was time to go back inside. It was time to stop the play. The dome light of my car cast a sickly yellow glow over the leather interior, creating a small, illuminated island in the vast darkness of the estate grounds. I sat there for what felt like hours, though the digital clock on the dashboard told me only 12 minutes had passed since I walked out of the ballroom. The envelope from Hawthorne and Briggs lay open on my lap, the red wax seal broken. The cover letter I had just glanced at acting as the prologue to a story I was terrified to finish. I had read the headline. I knew I was the beneficiary, but knowing the headline and reading the article are two very different things. The headline gives you the shock. The details give you the weapon, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to hold the gun. My hands were hovering over the thick stack of papers inside the envelope. I knew that the moment I pulled them out and read the specifics, I could never go back to being the girl who just wanted to be liked. I could never go back to the comfortable misery of being the victim. If I turned these pages, I became the executioner. I took a breath that shuddered in my chest, the cold air of the car doing little to cool the heat rising in my face. I reached in. My fingers brushed against three distinct textures. There was the sleek, cool feel of official government paper. There was the heavy bound weight of a legal dossier. And then, tucked in the middle, was the soft, fabric-like texture of expensive stationery. I pulled them all out, 3 items. I set the legal documents aside on the passenger seat and held the piece of purple stationery. My grandmother's handwriting was unmistakable, sharp, angular loops that looked like barbed wire made of ink. It wasn't the shaky scrawl of the old woman I had just left in the garden. This was written years ago. The ink was settled, the paper slightly yellowed at the edges. I unfolded it. My dearest Freya, if you are reading this, it means you have survived 25 years of a drought. You have lived in a desert of affection, thirsting for a drop of validation from people who are incapable of giving water to anyone but themselves. I am sorry I could not give it to you sooner. I am sorry I had to watch you scrub floors and accept insults while I sat in my chair and bit my tongue. But power, my darling, is all about timing. If I had given you this when you were 18, your father would have coerced it out of you. If I had given it to you when you were 21, your mother would have guilted you into sharing it. I had to wait until you were fully formed. I had to wait until the law recognized you as an adult who stands alone. Know this, and let it burn into your soul. You were never an outsider. The phrase, "not real family," was a fiction they invented. It was a lie they told themselves to justify why they loved a reflection of their own vanity, Ethan, more than they loved a child who asked for nothing. They needed you to be lesser, so they could feel more. It was never about your blood. It was about their inadequacy. The documents in this packet are the truth, and the truth is a hammer. Do not be afraid to swing it. Love, Grandma. I lowered the letter. A sound escaped my throat, a dry, hacking sob that surprised me. They needed you to be lesser so they could feel more. It was the most concise, brutal diagnosis of my childhood I had ever heard. It wasn't that I was unlovable. It was that my degradation was the fuel for their ego. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand, angry at the tears. I didn't want to cry. I wanted to see the receipts. I picked up the second document. It was a certified copy of a birth certificate. For a second, I didn't understand why it was there. My father's jokes about me not being a real Caldwell or a real Hughes had always been metaphorical, attacks on my character or my vibe, as Ethan would say. But seeing this document, the original state-issued paper with the raised seal, I realized Grandma was dismantling every potential legal argument they could ever try to mount. I traced the lines. Name of child, Freya Marie Hughes. Date of birth, October 20th, 2000. Mother, Carol Ann Caldwell. Father, Robert James Hughes. There were no amendment stamps, no adoption clauses, no surrogacy addendums. I was their flesh and blood. I was exactly as much their child as Ethan was. The rejection wasn't because I was different. The rejection was a choice, a cold, calculated choice to pour all their resources into one vessel and use the other as a servant. I set the birth certificate down on top of the letter. My hands were steady now. The sadness was evaporating, replaced by the cold, analytical focus I used when I was auditing a high-risk supply chain. I picked up the third document, the heavy one, the Marjorie Caldwell Dynasty Trust. I flipped past the cover page, scanning the legal definitions. The date of creation was October 23rd, 2000, 3 days after I was born. My grandmother hadn't waited to see if I was worthy. She hadn't waited to see if I was smart, or pretty, or obedient. She had looked at the baby in the crib, looked at the parents standing over it, and realized immediately that this child would need a parachute. I turned to the schedule of assets. I expected to see money. Grandma was comfortable. Everyone knew that, but I wasn't prepared for the itemization. Asset 1. the real property and all improvements located at 1400 Lakeshore Drive, Lake Forest, Illinois. I stopped breathing. The house, the estate, the mansion my father was currently standing inside, holding a glass of champagne, telling people he was going to sell. He didn't own it. I read the deed history attached to the trust. Marjorie had bought the house in 1990. She had transferred it into the trust in 2000. My parents had been living there for 25 years as, what? Guests? Tenants at will? I scanned the clauses. Grantors, Robert and Carol Hughes, are granted right of occupancy subject to the trustee's discretion. Provided they maintain the property and pay all applicable utilities, they hold no title, no equity, and no right of alienation. Right of alienation. That was the legal term for selling. They had no right to sell. They didn't even have the right to rent out a room. They were glorified house sitters. I moved to the next asset. Asset 2. The Caldwell-Hughes investment portfolio. The number next to the current valuation was written in bold. $2,450,000. It wasn't billionaire money, but for a girl who clipped coupons for pasta sauce and drove a car that rattled when it went over 40 miles per hour. It was enough to change the gravitational pull of the earth. Asset 3. Commercial property located at 405 Market Square. I frowned. I knew that building. It was a charming, historic brick storefront in the center of downtown Lake Forest. It currently housed a high-end boutique that sold cashmere sweaters and imported olive oil. It was prime real estate. I owned that too. I flipped the pages, my heart pounding a rhythm against my ribs that felt like a war drum. Beneficiary designation. Sole beneficiary. Freya Marie Hughes. Distribution event. The beneficiary's 25th birthday. It was ironclad. It was absolute. There was no shared with Ethan. There was no subject to parents' approval. But then, I found the dagger. It was buried on page 14, under a section titled Protective Provisions and Non-Contestability. I read it, and a chill went down my spine. Grandma Marjorie was not just generous. She was a strategist of the highest order. Clause 9.2. The anti-coercion provision. In the event that any immediate family member, specifically defined as Robert Hughes, Carol Hughes, or Ethan Hughes, attempts to coerce, manipulate, or legally force the beneficiary to sign over, pledge, or dilute her interest in this trust, or if they attempt to challenge the validity of this trust in any court of law. I leaned in closer, reading the text under the dome light. Then that individual shall be immediately and permanently disinherited from the personal estate of Marjorie Caldwell. Furthermore, if the beneficiary, Freya Hughes, signs any document transferring assets to said family members within 5 years of the distribution date, such transfer shall be null and void ab initio, as the trust deems such actions to be the result of undue influence. I gasped. She had booby-trapped the money. If my parents tried to bully me into giving them the house, which they absolutely would, they would lose their own inheritance from Grandma when she eventually passed. And even if I wanted to give it to them, if I had a moment of weakness and tried to sign the house over to save Ethan's startup, the trust wouldn't let me. She had protected me from them, but more importantly, she had protected me from myself. She knew that 25 years of conditioning makes it hard to say no, so she had made yes legally impossible. I dropped the papers onto the passenger seat. The silence of the car was different now. It wasn't the silence of a victim hiding in the dark. It was the silence of a commander reviewing the battlefield before the first cannon fire. I looked at my hands. They were the same hands that had scrubbed the guest toilet 3 hours ago. They were the same hands that had been slapped away from the hors d'oeuvres tray, but they didn't look the same. They looked steady. They looked capable. I wasn't crying about the money. I wasn't crying about the house. I covered my face and let out a long, shuddering breath as the tears finally came. Hot and fast. I cried because for 25 years, I thought I was walking through this life completely alone. I thought I was debris that had fallen off the family wagon. But I wasn't alone. Marjorie had been there. Every time I was sent to my room, every time I was mocked, Every time I was ignored, she had been there, silently writing a document that would one day give me the power to burn their entire fake kingdom to the ground. Someone had loved me enough to build a wall around me that even my father couldn't breach. I cried for 5 minutes. Then, I stopped. I reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a travel pack of tissues. I wiped my face. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. My eyes were red, but my jaw was set. I picked up the legal folder again, on the front page, under the letterhead of Hawthorne and Briggs. There was a phone number, next to it, a sticky note in Grandma's handwriting. Call him. He is waiting. Even tonight. It was Saturday night. It was late, but the note said, he is waiting. I pulled out my phone. My thumb hovered over the keypad. Inside the house, my father was probably clinking glasses, toasting to the bridge loan he thought he was going to get against the house. He was selling my roof to build Ethan's floor. I dialed the number. It rang once. Graham Hawthorne speaking. A voice answered immediately. It was deep, crisp, and sounded like it belonged to a man who charged $600 an hour. Mr. Hawthorne, I said. My voice didn't shake. This is Freya Hughes. Ms. Hughes, he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. Happy birthday. I have been expecting your call for a very long time. I have the envelope, I said. I have read the trust. Do you understand the contents? He asked. I do, I said. I looked up at the house again, at the silhouette of the banner in the window. Mr. Hawthorne, my father is currently announcing the sale of the Lake Forest estate to a room full of investors. He is claiming he is going to list it next week. I see, Hawthorne said, his tone shifting from polite to professional steel. That would be fraud. Ms. Hughes, and listing a property one does not own is a significant legal exposure. I want to stop it, I said. We can file an injunction on Monday, Hawthorne suggested. No, I said. Monday is too late. They are signing papers. They are taking deposits. I need to know exactly what they are doing with the house they don't own. And I need them to know that the lock on the door has been changed. What are your instructions? Hawthorne asked. I took a breath. Prepare the eviction notices. But first, tell me everything. I want the full ledger. I want to know every lie they have told the bank. Because when I walk back in there, I don't just want to be the daughter with a grievance. I want to be the owner with the receipts. Understood, Hawthorne said. I have the file open. Let's get to work. I put the phone on speaker and set it on the dashboard. I turned on the map light, illuminating the trust document one more time. The party was still raging inside. The jazz was playing. The champagne was flowing. But out here in the dark, the real celebration had just begun. Graham Hawthorne was a man who spoke in periods, not question marks. He called me at 9 o'clock sharp on Monday morning. I was back at my desk at Larkstone Supply Group in Milwaukee, staring at a spreadsheet of forklift maintenance schedules. But my mind was 3,000 miles away, or rather, 60 miles away, back in Lake Forest. Ms. Hughes, his voice came through my earbuds, crisp and devoid of the static that seemed to clutter every conversation I had with my family. I have reviewed the trust documents you scanned. I have also pulled the county records. The situation is binary. You are the legal owner. The blackout period expired the moment you turned 25. The house is yours. The portfolio is yours. The commercial unit is yours. And my parents? I asked, keeping my voice low so my cubicle neighbor wouldn't hear. They are trespassers with a very loose lease, Graham said. But trespassers can be dangerous if they think they still hold the keys. Have they contacted you? My phone has been buzzing since 6 this morning, I said. Do not answer, Graham commanded. Listen to me closely. Freya, this is the danger zone. They do not know you have the envelope, but they know the sale is moving forward, and their real estate attorney has likely flagged a potential issue with the title. They need to clear the board. They will try to get you to sign something. They will call it a formality. They will call it routine. They will likely say it is for tax purposes. What do? You send it to me, Graham said. You play dumb. You play the role they wrote for you. Be the helpful, slightly confused daughter. Stall them. But under no circumstances does ink touch paper until I say so. Understood. I am setting a trap, Graham continued. I am going to invite them to a meeting at my satellite office in Chicago on Thursday. I will tell them it is regarding estate housekeeping necessary for the sale. They will come because they smell money. We will drop the guillotine then. Thursday, I repeated. Thursday, he confirmed. Until then, hold the line. The line, as it turned out, was under heavy fire. The first grenade came from my father at 10 o'clock. It was an email. The subject line was simply, "Signatures needed. Urgent." I opened it. The body of the email was classic Robert Hughes, brief, demanding, and utterly lacking in warmth. Freya, hope you made it back to Milwaukee safely. You left the party early. Not a good look. But we covered for you. Attached are some standard family documents regarding the estate restructuring. The title company needs a quick sign-off from all residents to process the move. It is just a formality to say you don't have any claims against the furniture or fixtures, so we can list the house. Standard procedure, print, sign, and overnight these back to me by tomorrow morning. I need this done so I can focus on Ethan's closing. Dad. I didn't reply. I forwarded the email immediately to Graham. 10 minutes later, my phone vibrated. It was a text from my mother. Mom, Dad sent you an email. Answer him. We are under a lot of stress with the move and Ethan's business. Don't be difficult. Freya, you have a roof over your head because of us. The least you can do is help us downsize without drama. Be grateful. That phrase again. Be grateful. It was the weapon they had used to bludgeon me into submission for 2 decades. Be grateful for the scraps. Be grateful we didn't leave you at the fire station. I typed a reply, then deleted it. I typed another, then deleted that too. Finally, I channeled the cold, dead calm of a risk assessor. Me. Got the email. Printer is jammed at work. We'll look at it tonight. It was a lie. My printer was fine. But in the game of chess, you don't move your queen just because your opponent tells you to. You make them wait. At noon, the heavy artillery arrived. Ethan called. I let it go to voicemail. He called again, and again. On the 4th try, I picked up. What? I asked. Why are you ghosting Dad? Ethan's voice was loud, agitated. I could hear the background noise of a busy cafe. He is freaking out. Freya, we need those papers signed. I am at work. Ethan, I said. I have a job. Remember jobs? Don't be a smartass, he snapped. This is about the future of the family. My investors are waiting on the liquidity proof. Dad needs to show the house is clean to sell. Just sign the damn paper. It is a waiver. It just says you don't own the house, which is true. You don't. So why is it a problem? If I don't own it, why do I need to sign a waiver? I asked. It was a simple logical question. There was a pause on the line. Because lawyers are annoying. Freya, God, why do you have to make everything so complicated? You always do this. You try to make yourself important by dragging your feet. Just sign the waiver so I can get my funding. I will read it tonight, I said. Freya, I hung up. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. They were shaking from the sheer effort of suppressing the rage. It just says you don't own the house. He said it with such absolute certainty. He really believed it. They all did. At 2 o'clock, an email arrived from Graham Hawthorne. Subject: Analysis of document waiver of rights. Freya. I have reviewed the document your father sent. It is not a standard formality. This is a quitclaim deed coupled with a disclaim of interest affidavit. If you sign this, you are legally stating that you voluntarily forfeit any and all current or future interest in the property at 1400 Lakeshore Drive. You are essentially signing away your inheritance. But there is something more interesting. Look at the metadata of the attachment they sent you. They were sloppy. I opened the attachment Graham had flagged. It was the PDF my father had sent. I hadn't looked past the signature page, but Graham had dug deeper. In the email chain history at the bottom of the document, the part my father had likely meant to delete, but missed in his haste. There was a forward from a real estate agent. And there was an attachment I hadn't noticed. Draft _ purchase _ agreement _ v3.pdf. I clicked it. My breath hitched in my throat. It wasn't a plan. It wasn't a listing agreement. It was a sales contract. Seller: Robert and Carol Hughes. Buyer: The Kensington Group. Purchase price: $3,200,000. Closing date: November 15th. They weren't planning to sell the house to fund Ethan. They had already sold it. They had accepted an offer. The deal was done. They were just scrambling to clear the title before the closing date. They had sold my house. They had sold my grandmother's legacy. And they were going to use the $3 million to play venture capitalist with their golden child. I stared at the screen. The date on the contract draft was October 10th, 10 days before my birthday. 10 days before the party. They had smiled at me. They had handed me a toilet brush. And all the while, they had $3 million of stolen money burning a hole in their pocket. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I opened a new spreadsheet on my work computer. I named it the evidence log. Column A, date and time. Column B, sender. Column C, content. Column D, the lie. I started typing. Row 1, Monday, 10 a.m., Robert Hughes. Email. Claims document is standard formality. Truth. Document is a disclaim of interest to facilitate fraudulent sale. Row 2, Monday, 10:15 a.m., Carol Hughes. Text. Claims I should be grateful. Truth. Attempting emotional manipulation to secure signature. Row 3, Monday, 12 p.m., Ethan Hughes. Call. Claims liquidity proof needed. Truth. Purchase agreement already drafted with Kensington Group. I logged every text. I logged every missed call. I saved every voicemail. I was building a timeline. I was building a case. I wasn't their daughter anymore. I was the auditor, and they were failing the inspection. At 5 o'clock, I sent a reply to my father. Dad, I read the document. The language is a bit dense. I want to make sure I don't mess up the filing. Can I bring it to you in person? I have to come down to Chicago on Thursday anyway for a work meeting. It was the bait. His reply came 2 minutes later. Fine, but bring it signed. We can grab lunch. I forwarded the exchange to Graham. Graham. Excellent. I will send the formal invitation to their lawyer tomorrow morning. We will change the venue from lunch to conference room B. Wednesday passed in a blur of anxiety. The pressure from the family ramped up. My mother sent me a picture of us from when I was 5. Sitting on a pony. It was obviously cropped. I could see Ethan's arm on the side. Mom, remember how happy we were? We just want that specifically for you. Financial freedom. Once this deal goes through, we can help you with your student loans. I logged it. Row 15. Carol Hughes. Bribery attempt. Promises loan assistance using funds from stolen asset. I didn't reply. Thursday morning arrived. I put on my suit. The charcoal gray one I wore when I had to fire a vendor. I pulled my hair back into a tight bun. I didn't wear makeup to hide the circles under my eyes. I wanted to look tired. I wanted them to think I was weak. I drove to Chicago. The city was gray and imposing, the wind whipping off the lake. I parked in the garage under the Hawthorne and Briggs Tower on Wacker Drive. I took the elevator to the 45th floor. The doors opened onto a lobby that smelled of old money and intimidation, mahogany walls, leather chairs, and a view of the skyline that cost $1,000 a square foot. Graham Hawthorne was waiting for me. He was younger than I expected, perhaps in his early 40s, with a razor-sharp jawline and eyes that missed nothing. He wore a suit that fit him like armor. "Freya," he said, shaking my hand. His grip was firm. "You look ready." "I am done being scared," I said. "Good," he said, "because they are here." He led me down a long corridor. I sent the invitation to their family attorney, a man named Sterling. I told him we needed to clear up a minor trust discrepancy regarding the title before the sale could proceed. Sterling brought your parents. He thinks this is a 5-minute meeting to get a signature. Does Ethan know? I asked. Ethan is in the lobby, Graham said. He insisted on coming up to protect his investment. I let him in. We stopped in front of a double set of glass doors. Remember, Graham said, his hand on the handle. You don't have to say a word if you don't want to. I can do the talking. No, I said. I adjusted my blazer. I thought about the toilet list. I thought about the cake with the wrong name. I thought about the purchase agreement with the Kensington Group. I want to speak, I said. Graham nodded. He opened the door. The conference room was massive. A long oval table dominated the space. On one side sat my father, my mother, Ethan, and a sweating man in a cheap suit who must have been Sterling. They looked up as we entered. My father's face went through a complex series of gymnastics, confusion, recognition, then anger. Freya? He asked, standing up. What are you doing here? We were supposed to meet for lunch. Why are you with... Who is this? Sit down, Robert, Graham said. His voice wasn't loud, but it slammed into the room like a physical force. Excuse me? My father sputtered. Who are you? Graham walked to the head of the table. He placed a single file folder on the polished wood. I am Graham Hawthorne, he said. I am the executor of the Marjorie Caldwell Dynasty Trust, and I am the attorney for the owner of the property you are currently trying to sell. Owner? My mother laughed, a high, nervous titter. We are the owners. What is this nonsense? Freya, tell him. I walked to the table. I didn't sit. I stood directly across from them. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and placed it on the table. Screen up. I am not here to have lunch. Dad, I said. Freya, stop this, Ethan snapped. We have a schedule. Give me the waiver. I looked at Graham. He nodded. He pressed a button on the remote control in his hand. The massive screen on the wall behind us flickered to life. It wasn't a PowerPoint. It wasn't a chart. It was the PDF of the purchase agreement they had sent me by mistake. Seller, Robert and Carol Hughes. Buyer, the Kensington Group. We know about the sale, I said. The room went deadly silent. We know you have accepted an offer, and we know you lied to the buyer about having the title. That is a draft, Sterling squeaked, wiping his forehead. Just a preliminary. Graham clicked the button again. The screen changed. It was now displaying the trust deed from 2000, sole beneficiary, Freya Marie Hughes. And this, Graham said, is the actual title. As of October 20th, the property belongs to Freya, exclusively, irrevocably. My father's face turned a color I had never seen before, a mix of purple and gray. He looked at the screen, then at me, then at the screen again. That is impossible, he whispered. Marjorie, she wouldn't. She did, I said. 25 years ago. But the money, Ethan stammered. The investors. I promised them the liquidity. I showed them the house appraisal. You promised them my house, I corrected him. You promised them my money. It is family money, my mother shouted, standing up. Her mask was gone now. She looked feral. It is our money. We raised you. We fed you. How dare you steal this from your brother? I didn't steal anything, I said. I felt a strange sense of detachment, watching them unravel. I was given a shield. You are just mad because you can't use it as a sword anymore, Graham stepped forward. Mr. Sterling, as you can see, your clients have engaged in what we call attempted conversion of assets and fraudulent misrepresentation to the Kensington Group. If you do not withdraw the sale immediately, we will contact the buyer directly and inform them that they are purchasing stolen goods, and then we will contact the district attorney. Sterling looked like he was going to vomit. He turned to my father. Robert, you told me the title was clean. You told me the daughter was a non-factor. My father didn't answer. He was looking at me, but for the first time in my life, he wasn't looking down at me. He was looking at me with fear. I picked up my phone. You wanted a signature, I said to my father. You wanted a waiver. I reached into my bag and pulled out the document he had sent me. I ripped it in half. Then I ripped it again. I dropped the confetti of paper onto the polished table. Consider that my answer. I turned to Graham. I think we are done here. Not quite, Graham said, his eyes cold. We still have to discuss the eviction timeline. My mother gasped. Ethan slumped back in his chair, his face buried in his hands. My father just stared at the torn paper on the table, watching his empire turn into trash. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just walked to the window and looked out at the city. The wind was blowing hard outside, but in here, the air was finally clear. Before I walked into that conference room in Chicago and ripped the waiver in half, there was the night before. That Wednesday night was the longest night of my life, a span of 12 hours that felt heavier than the 25 years preceding it. I was staying in a budget hotel on the outskirts of the city, the kind with thin walls and neon light bleeding through the curtains, because I refused to stay at the house and I refused to spend a dime of the trust money until the war was won. I pushed the 2 twin beds apart and used the duvet to cover the gap. Turning the mattress into a makeshift desk, I spread the documents out. It was a chaotic mosaic of my life, told in legal headers and notarized stamps: the birth certificate, the trust deed, the evidence log I had printed from my work computer, the blurry screenshot of the purchase agreement. I stood over them, looking down like a general surveying a map of a country she had been exiled from. For a long time, I just stared at the birth certificate. Freya Marie Hughes. It was just paper, but it weighed a ton. I thought about the moment at the party, the toilet brush in my hand. For years, I had rationalized those moments. I had told myself that my mother was just stressed, that my father was just particular about cleanliness, that I was just being helpful. But in the silence of that hotel room, with the hum of the ice machine down the hall, the denial finally dissolved. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't stress. It was a habit. They didn't hand me the cleaning list because they needed a maid. They could afford a dozen maids. They handed it to me because seeing me on my knees, scrubbing their filth, reassured them of their own elevation. It was a power habit. Every time they made me small, they felt big. Every time they called me not real family, they cemented their own exclusive club. It was a psychological architecture built entirely on my back. I walked to the closet and pulled out my suit. It was the charcoal gray one I had bought at an outlet mall in Kenosha 3 years ago. I remembered buying it. I had saved for 2 months, eating instant noodles, to afford it because I had an interview at Larkstone and I wanted to look like I belonged in a boardroom. I hung it on the back of the door. I smoothed the lapel. That suit was the only thing in this equation that was 100% mine. My parents hadn't paid for it. My grandmother hadn't gifted it. I had earned it. Tomorrow, I whispered to the empty room, I am not wearing a costume. I am wearing armor. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. I picked it up, expecting another harassing text from Ethan or a guilt trip from my mother. It was a text from Grandma. Marjorie, get some sleep. Tomorrow. Do not argue. Do not explain. Do not justify. Arguments are for people who are negotiating. You are not negotiating. Let the papers speak. I stared at the screen. You are not negotiating. It was the permission I didn't know I needed. All my life, I had been negotiating for a smile, for a kind word, for a seat at the table. Grandma was telling me the trading floor was closed. I was about to turn off the phone when it rang. It was an unfamiliar number with a 312 area code. Chicago. It was 8 o'clock at night. Who calls at 8 o'clock? I answered, my voice wary. Hello? Hi, is this Robert Hughes? A male voice, fast-talking, distracted. This is Kevin from the scheduling desk at Premier Realty. I have a request for a second viewing of the Lake Forest property for Saturday at 10. The Kensington buyers want to bring their architect to measure for renovations. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. I am sorry, I said, my voice dangerously calm. Who is calling? Kevin, he repeated, sounding annoyed. Look, Mr. Hughes listed you as the secondary contact if he wasn't available. Can we lock in Saturday? They are eager to close. They want to start knocking down walls in November. Knocking down walls. My stomach dropped. They weren't just selling the house. They were selling it to people who were going to gut it. They were going to erase my grandmother's library. They were going to tear out the rose garden. And my father had authorized it. He had listed the house weeks ago. He had been conducting viewings while I was sitting at work. He had been parading strangers through my home, selling off my heritage like it was a used car. "There will be no viewing on Saturday," I said. "Excuse me?" Kevin asked. "Mr. Hughes said, Mr. Hughes does not own the property," I cut him off. "And if you bring anyone to that address on Saturday, you will be trespassing." I hung up before he could respond. My hands were shaking again. But this time, it wasn't the shake of anxiety. It was the shake of a weapon being loaded. I dialed Graham immediately. "They are doing viewings," I said the moment he answered. "They have buyers bringing architects. They are trying to gut the place." "I see," Graham said. He sounded awake, alert. "That explains their urgency with the waiver. They are running out of time." "Stop them," I said. "I am drafting a cease and desist to the brokerage firm right now," Graham said. "I will fax it to their legal department at 8 in the morning. By the time we walk into that meeting, the real estate agent will have received a notification that the listing is fraudulent. The sale will be dead in the water before your father even pours his morning coffee." "Good," I said. "Freya," Graham added, his voice softening slightly. "Try to sleep. You need to be sharp." I hung up, but sleep was impossible. I sat back down on the bed amidst the sea of papers. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. For 25 years, fear had been my constant companion. Fear of being yelled at, fear of being ignored, fear of not being enough. But as I sat there, listening to the sirens wailing in the distance, I realized the fear was gone. It had simply evaporated. In its place was something colder. Choice. For the first time in my life, I had the power to choose how the story ended. I could choose to be the victim, or I could choose to be the landlord. I could choose to save them, or I could choose to let them face the consequences of their own greed. I grabbed the hotel notepad and a cheap plastic pen. I needed to write this down. I needed to cement my resolve before I saw their faces. I knew my mother would cry. I knew my father would shout. I knew Ethan would beg. I needed rules. I wrote, the boundaries. 1. No apologies. I would not apologize for owning what was mine. I would not apologize for their lack of planning. I would not apologize for surviving. 2. No negotiation under pressure. If they yelled, I would walk. If they cried, I would wait. I would not sign anything to keep the peace. 3. Truth over harmony. They had traded the truth for a comfortable lie for decades. I would not participate in the delusion anymore. If the truth destroyed the family, then the family was already dead. I looked at the list. The ink was dark and permanent. I went to the window and pulled back the curtain. The Chicago skyline was a jagged row of lights against the black sky. Somewhere out there, my father was probably sleeping soundly, dreaming of the $3 million he thought he had secured. He thought tomorrow was just a formality. He thought I was coming to kneel. He had no idea that I was coming to stand. I turned off the lamp, plunging the room into darkness. I lay in the bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rhythm of my own breathing. In, out, in, out. It was the breath of a free woman. I understood then that tomorrow wasn't about the money. It wasn't about the house. It wasn't even about revenge. Not really. Tomorrow was the day I stopped being the extra in their movie. Tomorrow was the day I finally, after 25 years of waiting, introduced myself to them. My name is Freya Hughes. I thought as I finally closed my eyes, and this is my house. The conference room at Hawthorne and Briggs was a study in intimidation. It was not designed for comfort. It was designed to remind you that you were in a place where decisions cost millions of dollars. The walls were floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a panoramic view of the Chicago skyline that looked like a jagged set of teeth biting into the gray sky. The table was a slab of polished walnut so long it had its own weather system. The air smelled of lemon oil and conditioned silence. I sat on the left side of the table, my back to the window. I had arrived 30 minutes early. I wanted to be part of the room's geography before they arrived. I wanted to be as still and immovable as the furniture. Graham Hawthorne sat at the head of the table, not the center. He was busy arranging a stack of files with geometric precision. He didn't look up when I checked my watch. It was 9:59. "They are in the elevator," Graham said, his voice level. "Remember the strategy. Silence is a vacuum. They will try to fill it with noise. Let them—" At 10 o'clock exactly, the heavy oak doors swung open. My father, Robert Hughes, walked in first. He didn't just enter. He invaded. He wore his Navy power suit, the one he saved for board meetings and bank presentations. He carried a leather briefcase that I knew contained absolutely nothing of substance, just props for the performance of a busy man. He scanned the room, saw me, and gave a curt, dismissive nod. He walked straight to the chair at the opposite head of the table, the position of authority, and pulled it out with a scrape of wood against carpet. "Let us get started," my father said, tossing his briefcase onto the pristine table. He didn't wait for Graham to invite him to sit. "I have a lunch meeting at the club at 12, so we need to wrap this up. Just the standard sign-offs, right?" My mother followed him in. She looked different. Usually, Carol Hughes was a fortress of social grace, but today, her foundation seemed cracked. She was wearing sunglasses, which she took off slowly, revealing eyes that were rimmed with red. She sat next to my father, but she pulled her chair slightly away from him. She didn't look at the lawyer. She didn't look at the view. And she certainly didn't look at me. She stared at a knot in the wood of the table as if it were the most fascinating thing she had ever seen. "Good morning, Mr. Hughes, Mrs. Hughes," Graham said. He didn't stand up. He didn't offer coffee. "Who is this?" my father asked, gesturing to Graham with a wave of his hand. "Where is Sterling? I thought we were meeting with the family attorney." "Mr. Sterling was not invited," Graham said, "because Mr. Sterling does not represent the owner of the assets in question." My father frowned, his brow furrowing. "I don't have time for riddles. I am the owner. If this is about the title insurance, just give me the pen." The door banged open again. Ethan hurried in. He was wearing a hoodie under a blazer, the uniform of the tech bro who wants you to know he is too disruptive for a tie. He looked frantic. He was holding a phone to his ear, whispering aggressively. "Yeah, the valuation is solid. No, I can't transfer the funds yet. Just hold the position." He hung up and threw himself into the chair next to my mother. "Sorry I'm late," Ethan said, though he didn't sound sorry at all. He looked at Graham, then at me. "Okay, are we done? Did we sell? What is the final number? I need the wire transfer initiated by Monday or I lose my office lease." He didn't say hello. He didn't ask how I was. He asked how much. "We are just reviewing the inventory," Graham said calmly. He opened the file in front of him. "Mr. Hughes, before we proceed with any signatures, I need to verify the asset list you provided to the Kensington Group. Is that acceptable?" "It is standard," my father said, drumming his fingers on the table. "The house, the land, the contents, it is all there. Can we speed this up?" "Of course," Graham said. He picked up a document. Item 1. The primary residence located at 1400 Lakeshore Drive, Lake Forest. You have listed this as the principal asset for sale." "Yes," my father said, leaning back, confident. "Prime location. We accepted an offer of $3,200,000, a fair price for a quick close." Item 2, Graham continued, ignoring the price. "The Caldwell Hughes investment portfolio, held at Vanguard." "That is the liquid capital," Ethan interjected, leaning forward, his eyes hungry. "That is the seed money. That goes directly to the startup account." "And item 3, Graham read. "The commercial unit at 405 Market Square." "My wife's little investment," my father said, waving a hand. "We are liquidating that too. Clean slate. We are moving to the city." Graham closed the folder. The sound was soft, but in the quiet room, it sounded like a pistol shot. "Thank you for confirming," Graham said. He clasped his hands on top of the file. "There is just one significant problem with this inventory. Mr. Hughes." "And what is that?" my father asked, checking his watch. "The closing costs? We can absorb them." "The problem," Graham said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerously smooth, "is that you have listed 3 assets that do not belong to you." The room went still. The air conditioning hum seemed to stop. My father laughed. It was a dry, incredulous sound. "Excuse me? I have lived in that house for 25 years. I pay the taxes. I pay the gardener. Don't tell me what I own." "Occupancy is not ownership," Graham said. "And paying the bills is the obligation of a tenant, not the privilege of a landlord." "Tenant?" My father stood up, his face flushing a deep, angry red. "I am not a tenant. I am the head of this family. This is absurd. Come on. Carol, we are leaving. I am calling Sterling." "Sit down, Robert," Graham said. He didn't raise his voice, but the command was absolute. "If you walk out that door, the next call I make is to the district attorney's office to report real estate fraud. You have signed a purchase agreement for property you do not hold title to. That is a felony." My father froze. He looked at the door, then back at Graham. He slowly sank back into his chair. "Explain," he hissed, "the assets you are trying to sell." Graham said, "Were never part of a will. They were never part of a joint estate. They were placed into an irrevocable dynasty trust on October 20th in the year 2000. Ethan looked up from his phone, his face pale. "Wait, a trust? What kind of trust?" "A trust established by Marjorie Caldwell," Graham said, "to ensure that the family wealth bypassed the immediate generation." My mother let out a small, strangled sound. She covered her mouth with her hand. She knew. Deep down, she had always known. "So who is the trustee?" my father demanded. "Marjorie? She is senile. I can get power of attorney. I can overturn it." "Marjorie resigned as trustee 3 days ago," Graham said. "The trust has now vested. The blackout period ended this week." "So who is the beneficiary?" Ethan asked. His voice was high and tight. "If it's a trust, someone has to be the beneficiary. Is it Mom? Because if it is Mom, she can just sign it over to me, right?" He turned to my mother. "Mom, tell him to transfer it." My mother didn't speak. She was shaking her head slowly, tears leaking from under her sunglasses. Graham didn't answer Ethan. Instead, he slowly turned his head. He looked past my father. He looked past my mother. He looked directly at me. "Ms. Hughes," Graham said, "would you like to inform them, or shall I?" My father turned to look at me. For the first time since he entered the room, he actually saw me. He looked confused, as if he couldn't understand why the furniture was being addressed. "Freya?" he asked. "What does she have to do with this?" I stood up. My legs felt strong. My hands, resting on the cool walnut table, were steady. I took a breath, filling my lungs with the filtered air of the office. And when I exhaled, I let go of the girl who used to apologize for taking up space. "I will tell them," I said. I looked at my father. I looked at the man who had called me a charity case. I looked at my mother, who had handed me a toilet brush on my birthday. I looked at Ethan, who saw me as nothing more than a logistics manager for his ego. "You have been asking where the money is," I said. "You have been asking who holds the title." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small remote control Graham had given me before the meeting. "You told me all my life that I wasn't real family," I said. "You told me I didn't belong. You were right. I don't belong to your version of this family. And neither does the house." I pressed the button. The lights in the room dimmed automatically. A motorized screen descended silently from the ceiling behind me. The projector hummed to life, casting a bright blue light into the room. The document appeared on the screen. It was blown up to 5 feet tall. The letters were crisp and undeniable. The Marjorie Caldwell Dynasty. Trust. Sole beneficiary, Freya Marie Hughes. Effective date of control, October 20th, 2025. I watched their faces. Ethan's mouth fell open. He squinted at the screen, reading the lines over and over again, trying to find a loophole in the pixels. Freya? That says Freya. My mother let out a sob that sounded like something breaking. She slumped forward, putting her head on the table. My father stared at the screen. He didn't blink. His face went from red to a terrifying shade of gray. He looked at the name, Freya Marie Hughes, looming over him like a neon judgment. No, he whispered. That is a mistake. Marjorie wouldn't give it to her. She is nobody. She is the landlord, Graham corrected him from the end of the table. I walked over to the screen, standing next to my name. I own the house, Dad, I said. I own the investments. I own the storefront. And as of this morning, I have instructed Mr. Hawthorne to cancel the listing with the Kensington Group. You can't, Ethan shouted. Jumping up, I have bills. I have investors. If that money doesn't come through, I am bankrupt. You are ruining me. I am not ruining you, Ethan, I said calmly. I am just stopping you from spending my money. It is not your money, my father roared, slamming his hand on the table. I earned that life. I maintained that house. I raised you, you ungrateful little... He started to move toward me. His fists clenched. Graham didn't move, but he spoke 2 words that froze my father in his tracks. Security, now. My father stopped. He looked at Graham, then at the camera in the corner of the room. He realized, finally, where he was. He wasn't in his living room where he could bully me. He was in a law firm. He was in the real world. Sit down, I said to my father. It was the first time in my life I had ever given him an order. He looked at me with hatred, but he sat. You are going to listen to me now, I said. For 25 years, I listened to you. I listened to you tell me I was worthless. I listened to you tell me to know my place. Well, I know my place now. I pointed to the screen. My place is on the deed. I looked at the 3 of them. The father who despised me, the mother who ignored me, the brother who used me. They looked small. They looked terrified. They looked like strangers. And now, I said, we are going to talk about my terms. The projection screen hummed with a low, electric buzz, the blue light casting long, ghastly shadows across the faces of my family. My name, Freya Marie Hughes, hovered above us like a verdict written in neon. The silence in the room was not empty. It was heavy, suffocating. The kind of silence that happens after a bomb detonates, but before the dust settles. This is a forgery, my father said. His voice was a low growl, vibrating with a desperate, animalistic denial. He stood up, his chair scraping violently against the floor, and pointed a shaking finger at the screen. It is a fake, he shouted, his voice cracking. Marjorie is confused, or you manipulated her. You tricked a senile old woman into signing a piece of paper she didn't understand. I will have this annulled. I will have you arrested for elder abuse. Graham Hawthorne didn't even blink. He reached into his file and slid a thick, bound document across the polished walnut table. It stopped inches from my father's clenched fist. That is the original affidavit of the trust creation, Graham said, his tone bored, as if he were explaining a parking ticket to a toddler. Dated October 23rd, 2000. It was notarized by Judge William Sterling, your current lawyer's father, actually, and it was witnessed by 2 senior partners of this firm. Marjorie Caldwell was 65 years old and perfectly sound of mind. She wasn't tricked, Robert. She was planning. My father stared at the document. He didn't touch it. He looked at it as if it were radioactive. But the birth certificate, my mother stammered, lifting her head from her hands. Her makeup was smeared, turning her eyes into dark, hollow pools. You aren't. I tapped the remote again. The image on the screen changed. The trust document vanished, replaced by a high-resolution scan of my birth certificate. Mother, Carol Ann Caldwell. Father, Robert James Hughes. I am not what... Mother? I asked softly. I am not real family? Is that what you were going to say? I walked closer to them, my heels clicking on the floor. For 25 years, you let him say it, I said, looking at her. You let him tell jokes about me being a charity case. You let him hint to the neighbors that I was adopted, or a stepchild, or something other. You let me believe I was lucky just to be allowed in the house. I pointed at the screen. I am your daughter. I am your biological child. There is no mystery. There is no adoption drama. You didn't exclude me because I wasn't yours. You excluded me because you didn't like me, because I wasn't Ethan. My mother let out a wail, a sharp, piercing sound of misery. No, Freya, no, we loved you. We had to prioritize. Ethan needed more help. He was special. I watched her cry. I watched the tears stream down her face, ruining her silk blouse. A week ago, those tears would have broken me. I would have rushed to comfort her, to apologize for making her sad. But today, looking at her through the lens of a property owner, I saw the tears for what they were. She wasn't crying because she had hurt me. She was crying because her narrative was collapsing. She was crying because the ugly truth of her favoritism was being projected on a 5-foot screen in a stranger's office. Stop crying, Carol, my father snapped. He was flipping through the trust document now, his hands tearing at the pages. There has to be a clause, a loophole. She can't just own it. There are no loopholes, Graham said. The trust is absolute. Upon her 25th birthday, Freya assumes full control. You are guests. And frankly, you are guests who have overstayed your welcome. This is insane, Ethan yelled. He had been staring at his phone, scrolling frantically. But now he looked up, his face slick with sweat. Dad, fix this. You said the money was coming. You said the house was sold. I am working on it, my father roared at him. You don't understand. Ethan stood up, knocking his chair over. I signed the lease. Dad, I signed the lease for the office in the Loop yesterday. I put down the deposit check based on the wire transfer you promised was coming on Monday. If that check bounces, I am liable for the full year. That is $200,000. You did what? My father froze. You told me to, Ethan screamed, his voice breaking. You said, go big, Ethan, the money is secured. I hired contractors. I ordered furniture. I have $50,000 in invoices due on Friday. If I don't pay them, they will sue me personally. I watched them turn on each other. It was fascinating. The united front of the real family dissolved the moment the money vanished. They were rats on a sinking ship, and they were starting to bite. Freya, Ethan turned to me, his eyes wide and wild. Freya, listen, you can't let this happen. This is my career. This is my reputation. If I default on these contracts, I am blacklisted. Just sign the house over, or lend me the money. You can lend it to me from the trust. I will pay you back with interest, high interest. I promise. I looked at my brother. He looked pathetic. He was 27 years old, and he had never solved a problem in his life without someone else's checkbook. I am a risk assessor, Ethan, I said calmly. That is my job. I look at potential investments, and I calculate the probability of failure. I paused, letting him hope for a second. Funding you, I said, is a 100% guaranteed loss. You don't have a business plan. You have a gambling addiction funded by our parents' theft. Theft? My father's head snapped up. The word seemed to slap him sober. I didn't steal anything. I managed the asset. You listed a property you didn't own, Graham cut in. You accepted a purchase offer under false pretenses. You took a deposit. My father's face changed, the anger drained away, replaced by a sudden, terrifying calculation. He looked at Graham, then at the screen, and finally, he settled his gaze on me. And then, he smiled. It wasn't a real smile. It was the smile he used when he was trying to charm a waiter into giving him a better table. It was oily and desperate. "Freya, honey," he said. The word made my skin crawl. Honey. He hadn't called me that since I was 4. "Let's everyone take a breath," my father said, walking around the table toward me. He held his hands up, palms open, the universal gesture of a harmless man. "We are getting emotional. We are saying things we don't mean. Look at us. We are family." He stopped a few feet away from me. He lowered his voice to a soft, intimate pitch. "I know we have been tough on you," he said. "I know I have been hard, but it was only because I saw potential in you. Freya, I wanted you to be strong, and look at you. You are strong. You are brilliant. You outsmarted us all." He let out a little chuckle, shaking his head as if admiring a clever prank. "You proved your point, sweetheart," he continued. "You are a real Hughes. You have the killer instinct. I am proud of you, truly." He reached out a hand to touch my shoulder. I didn't move away. I didn't flinch. I just looked at his hand, then up at his eyes. My gaze was so cold, it could have frozen the water in the glass pitcher on the table. "Don't touch me," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it stopped him dead. "Freya, please," he said, his smile faltering. "We can work this out. We can be partners. You own the house? Fine. Brilliant move. But we can develop it together. We can use the equity to build something for all of us. For the family." "The family," I repeated. "Yes," he said, nodding eagerly. "The family." "You use that word like a light switch," I said. "You turn it on when you need something. You turn it off when I'm in the room." I took a step toward him, forcing him to take a step back. 25 years, Dad," I said. "For 25 years. Family was the club you used to beat me down. Family was the reason I had to scrub the floors while Ethan played video games. Family was the reason I had to eat in the kitchen while you entertained guests. Family was the reason I wasn't allowed to have a voice. I was teaching you responsibility," he argued. But his voice was weak. "No," I said. "You were teaching me that I was disposable." I looked over at my mother and Ethan. "You told me I wasn't real family so many times. I finally believed you," I said. "And that is why you are going to lose. Because you convinced me I was an outsider, and outsiders don't owe you mercy." My father's mask fell. The sweet dad vanished. The predator returned. But this time, the predator was cornered. "You ungrateful bitch," he hissed. "I will sue you. I will tie this trust up in court for decades. You will never see a dime. I have rights. I have squatter's rights. I have adverse possession." Graham cleared his throat. "Actually, Mr. Hughes, you have none of those things." Graham pressed a button on his laptop. A new document appeared on the screen. It was an email, a very recent email, from Robert Hughes to Sarah Jenkins, Premier Realty Broker, date September 15th, 2025. Subject, title confirmation. Sarah, yes, confirm the listing. I am the sole owner. The deed is in the safe. No other claims on the property exist. Proceed with the Kensington offer. This, Graham said, pointing to the screen, is evidence of fraud. You explicitly stated in writing to a licensed broker that you were the sole owner and that no other claims existed. You knew the trust existed because you signed the acknowledgement in 2000. You lied to the broker. You lied to the buyer. And you lied to the bank to secure the bridge loan you mentioned earlier. My father turned pale white. This isn't a civil dispute about a will, Graham said, leaning forward. This is criminal fraud. If you sue Freya, if you challenge the trust, this email becomes Exhibit A, and I will personally hand it to the state attorney. The room went silent again. This time, it was the silence of a grave. My father slumped. He looked at the email. He looked at the wreckage of his schemes. He realized, finally, that he had no moves left. He wasn't playing chess anymore. He was standing in front of a firing squad. "So," Ethan whispered, his voice trembling. "It is over? We are homeless?" "Not homeless," I said. They all looked at me. Hope flickered in my mother's eyes. A tiny spark of arrogance returned to my father's face. They thought I was breaking. They thought the guilt was kicking in. They thought the years of conditioning were finally working. "I am not a monster," I said. "I am not you." "Freya," my mother sobbed, reaching a hand out across the table. "Oh, thank God. Thank God. I knew you were good. I knew you loved us." "I didn't say you could stay," I said sharply. Her hand dropped. "I said you aren't homeless yet," I clarified. "I am the owner, and as the owner, I have the right to decide who lives in my house and who leaves." I walked back to the head of the table. Standing next to Graham, I picked up the folder containing the eviction notices Graham had prepared. I held it in my hand, feeling the weight of it. "I could have the sheriff here in an hour," I said. "I could have your things thrown on the lawn. I could press charges for the fraud and watch Dad get led out in handcuffs." My father flinched. "But I am not going to do that today," I said. I dropped the folder on the table. It landed with a heavy thud. "I am going to give you a choice," I said. "But it is going to be my choice, on my terms, on my timeline." "What do you want?" my father asked. His voice was a whisper. He looked like a man who had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. "I want the truth," I said. "I want a full accounting of every dollar you spent from the account you claimed was yours. I want a list of every lie you told about me to the family and the neighbors. And I want you to go back to that house, pack exactly 1 suitcase each, and wait for my call." "1 suitcase?" my mother cried. "But my clothes, my jewelry." "Your jewelry was bought with money from the Caldwell portfolio," I said. "It belongs to the trust. You can take what you bought with your own salary." "Oh, wait, you haven't had a salary in 20 years. I looked at Ethan. "And you?" I said. "You are going to cancel the lease. You are going to lose the deposit, and you are going to get a job, a real job, maybe at a warehouse. I hear they are hiring cleaners." "Freya, you can't," Ethan whimpered. "I haven't decided yet," I said. "That is the beauty of being the landlord. I don't have to decide today. Maybe I will let you stay in the guest room. Maybe I will make you pay rent. Maybe I will evict you tomorrow." I looked at my father. He was staring at me with a mixture of terror and grudging respect. He knew he had created this. He had forged me in the fire of his own cruelty. And now, he was looking at the blade he had sharpened. "Go home," I said. "Sit in the house that isn't yours. Look at the walls you don't own. And wait." I turned to Graham. "We are done here." I walked out of the room without looking back. I heard my mother sobbing behind me, but I didn't stop. I walked down the hallway, my heart beating steady and slow. I didn't kill them. I didn't save them. I did something much worse. I left them in the dark, wondering when the lights would go out. The silence in the conference room was broken only by the hum of the projector fan cooling down, a sound that felt strangely like the dying breath of my father's ambitions. I did not leave the building immediately after walking out of the room. Instead, I sat in Graham Hawthorne's private office, drinking a cup of hot tea, watching the city of Chicago churn below me through the glass. I needed the distance. I needed the steel and glass of the skyscraper to act as a barrier between me and the biological reality of the people I had just dismantled. Graham entered the room 20 minutes later. He did not look triumphant. He looked professional, like a surgeon who had just successfully removed a gangrenous limb. "They are gone," he said, sitting opposite me. Sterling, their lawyer, was practically trembling. He had no idea about the trust. He feels he has been made a fool of, which means he will not be inclined to help your father fight this. He advised them to accept whatever terms you offer. Good, I said, setting my cup down. Then let us draft the terms. We spent the next hour outlining the end of their era. I did not want to throw them onto the street that afternoon. That would have been dramatic, yes, but it would have given them a reason to play the victim. It would have allowed them to tell their country club friends that I was a vindictive monster who abandoned her elderly parents. I wanted to be cleaner than that. I wanted to be unimpeachable. 90 days, I told Graham. They have 90 days to vacate the premises. That is generous. That is enough time to find an apartment, pack their things, and leave with some shred of dignity. And the conditions? Graham asked, his pen hovering over the legal pad. Total freeze, I said. From this moment forward, they cannot list the house. They cannot show the house. They cannot borrow against the equity of the house. They cannot sell a single piece of furniture, art, or jewelry that was purchased before the year 2005 without the written consent of the trust. And the sale to the Kensington Group? Kill it, I said. Now. Graham picked up his phone. He dialed the number for the legal department of the brokerage firm my father had used. He put it on speaker so I could hear. "This is Graham Hawthorne," he said when the general counsel answered. "I am representing the legal owner of 1400 Lakeshore Drive. I am calling to inform you that the listing agreement signed by Robert Hughes is fraudulent. He does not hold title. Any contracts he has signed are void ab initio. We will be sending over the trust deed and the cease and desist order within the hour." I heard the gasp on the other end of the line. Then came the panic. "Mr. Hawthorne, we have a $3 million deal in escrow. We have architects scheduled. Are you telling me the seller has no standing?" "I am telling you the seller is a tenant," Graham said. "And if you proceed with any further action on this property, we will name your brokerage as a co-conspirator in a fraud lawsuit." The line went dead as they scrambled to pull the plug. It was done. In less than 2 minutes, the $3 million my father thought was his retirement fund evaporated into the ether. I drove back to Lake Forest that evening. I did not go to a hotel. I went to the house, my house, when I walked through the front door. The atmosphere was funereal. There were no lights on in the foyer. The house was silent, but it was a tense, vibrating silence. My father was sitting in the living room, in the dark, staring at the unlit fireplace. He held a glass of scotch in his hand. He didn't look up when I entered. "I raised you," he said. His voice was thick, slurring slightly. "I put food on your table. I paid for your braces. I put clothes on your back." I stopped in the doorway. I didn't take off my coat. "You did those things because the law required you to. Dad, you did those things because if you hadn't, child services would have taken me away. Doing the bare minimum to keep a human being alive does not give you ownership of their soul. I could have kicked you out at 18, he muttered. "And I would have left," I said. "In fact, I did leave. I built a life without you. I didn't ask you for anything. But you couldn't build a life without Grandma's money, could you?" He slammed the glass down on the side table. "It is family money. It was supposed to be mine. I managed this estate. I kept the roof from leaking. I paid the property taxes." "With whose money?" I asked quietly. "Did you pay it with your salary? Or did you pay it from the dividends of the Caldwell portfolio?" He fell silent. We both knew the answer. He hadn't spent a dime of his own money on this house in 20 years. "Here is the reality," I said, placing a thick envelope on the coffee table. "You have 90 days. You will live here as guests. If you damage one wall, if you sell one vase, the eviction becomes immediate, and I will press criminal charges for theft." "You wouldn't put your father in jail," he sneered. "Try me," I said. "You signed a purchase agreement claiming you were the sole owner. That is fraud. Dad, I have the email. Graham has the email. If you want to avoid a felony indictment, you will sign the document in that envelope acknowledging that you have no claim to the title. You will admit it was a misunderstanding. If you sign it, I won't prosecute. If you don't, I call the district attorney." He looked at the envelope. He looked at me. He saw the cold, hard math in my eyes. He realized that the daughter he had bullied for 25 years was gone. In her place was a landlord who knew exactly what the lease was worth. He picked up the pen. His hand shook, but he signed. He signed away his pride to save his freedom. I went to the kitchen to get a glass of water. My mother was there. She was sitting at the island, her eyes swollen, when she saw me. She stood up and rushed over, grabbing my hands. "Freya," she whispered, her voice trembling with a desperate intimacy. "Can we talk? Just us girls? Private talk?" I pulled my hands away. "I am tired. Mom, please," she begged. "Don't be like this. I know you are hurt. I know we made mistakes, but we are mother and daughter. There is a bond there that money can't break. I want to fix this. I want us to be close." "You want us to be close," I repeated. "Now that I have the checkbook." "That is not fair," she cried. "I love you. I have always loved you. It was just your father. He was so hard on you. I was trying to protect you." "Stop," I said. "Just stop." I looked at her, really looked at her. She wasn't a monster. She was a weak woman who had married a bully and decided it was easier to join him than to protect her child. She had traded my happiness for her own comfort. "I don't want your tears," I said, "and I don't want a private talk where you try to rewrite history to make yourself feel better. If you want a relationship with me, it starts with truth. You don't get to be my mother just because you are scared of being poor. You have to earn it." "How?" she asked, weeping. "How do I earn it?" "Start by packing your own boxes," I said, "and stop looking at me like I am an ATM." I left her crying in the kitchen, not for me, but for the lifestyle she was losing. I went upstairs. Ethan was waiting in the hallway outside my old room. He looked like a ghost. His arrogance was completely gone, replaced by a terrified childishness. "Freya," he said, his voice cracking. I canceled the lease. The landlord is keeping the deposit. That was $20,000. Freya, that was all the cash I had." "That is an expensive lesson," I said. "I have debts," he whispered. "The contractors, the furniture. I owe people money, real money. If I don't pay them, they are going to sue me. I could go bankrupt." He looked at me with puppy dog eyes. "I know you are mad, but could you just loan me $50,000? Just to clear the debts? I will pay you back. I swear. I will get a job. I will do anything. Just don't let me drown." I looked at my brother. For his entire life, whenever he fell, someone had put a pillow under him. He had never hit the ground. And because he never hit the ground, he never learned how to stand up. "No," I said. He flinched as if I had hit him. "What? But you have millions." "50,000 is nothing to you." "It is not about the amount," I said. "It is about the pattern. If I pay your debts today, you will have new debts tomorrow. You are addicted to other people's money, Ethan, and I am not going to be your dealer." "So you are just going to let me fail?" he asked, horrified. "Yes," I said. "I am going to let you fail. I am going to let you get sued. I am going to let you file for bankruptcy if you have to, because that is the only way you will ever become a man. You need to hit the bottom so you can see what it actually looks like." "That is cruel," he spat. "No," I said, opening the door to my room. "Giving you a sports car when you were 16 was cruel. It made you think the world owed you a ride. I am giving you the truth. It is the first real gift you have ever received." I closed the door in his face. The next 3 months were a strange, quiet season. They lived in the house like ghosts. They packed their boxes in silence. The bluster was gone. My father stopped drinking. My mother stopped hosting parties. Ethan got a job as a junior sales associate at a car dealership. Not a glamorous job, but a real one. I watched them from a distance. I didn't gloat. I didn't terrorize them. I just existed in my house, paying the bills, managing the repairs, and letting the reality of the power shift settle into the walls. On the 90th day, the moving truck arrived. I stood on the porch and watched them load the last of their personal items. They looked smaller somehow. My father looked like an old man. My mother looked tired. Ethan looked humbled. My father paused at the bottom of the stairs. He looked up at the house, then at me. "We are going to a condo in Skokie," he said. It was a modest suburb, far from the glitter of Lake Forest. "It is smaller. It will be easier to clean," I said. He nodded slowly. He wanted to say something else, maybe an insult, maybe an apology, but he couldn't find the words. He just turned and got into his car. When the taillights disappeared down the driveway, I didn't feel a surge of joy. I felt a profound, heavy peace. The air in the house seemed to change instantly. The tension that had lived in the drywall for 25 years evaporated. I walked back inside. The house was empty of their clutter, but it was full of potential. I walked to the hallway where the family wall used to be. It had been dominated by photos of Ethan winning a trophy, Ethan graduating, Ethan smiling. There had been one photo of me, tucked in the bottom corner, blurry and out of focus. I took down the hooks where their pictures had hung. I spackled the holes. I painted the wall a fresh, clean cream color. Then, I hung a single photograph. It was a black and white picture of me and Grandma Marjorie. We were sitting in the garden, drinking tea. I was 6 years old, looking up at her with adoration. She was looking at me with a fierce, protective love. Underneath the photo, on the matting, she had written, "The truth does not sleep." I touched the glass of the frame. "We did it, Grandma," I whispered. "They are gone." In the weeks that followed, I rebuilt my life. I used a portion of the trust income to pay off my student loans in full. I sent the confirmation letter to the bank and felt lighter than air. I kept my job at Larkstone Supply because I liked it, but I reduced my hours. I didn't need to work for survival anymore. I worked for purpose. I invested the rest of the liquid capital conservatively. I didn't buy a sports car. I didn't go on a lavish vacation. I fixed the roof. I updated the heating system. I tended to the rose garden that my grandmother loved. I invited Grandma over every Sunday. We sat in the library, which I had reclaimed from my father's cigar smoke. We drank tea. We talked about books. We talked about the future. One Sunday, as the sun was setting over the lake, casting long golden shadows across the lawn, Grandma looked at me. "You didn't destroy them," she observed. "You could have destroyed them, Freya. You could have prosecuted them. You could have left them with nothing." "I didn't need to," I said. "If I destroyed them, I would just be continuing the cycle. I would be the abuser. I didn't want revenge. Grandma, I just wanted justice." "And what is the difference?" she asked, her eyes twinkling. "Revenge is about making them feel pain," I said, looking out at the garden that was finally truly mine. "Justice is about making them feel the truth. They know who they are now, and more importantly, I know who I am. I am not the maid. I am not the charity case. I am not the fake family. I am Freya Hughes. I am the daughter who survived. I am the woman who waited." And as I looked around the silent, beautiful rooms of my home, I realized the greatest revenge wasn't seeing them leave. The greatest revenge was the quiet happiness of staying. I walked to the front door and opened it, breathing in the cool air of the lake. I wasn't waiting for permission to enter anymore. I was standing on my own threshold. The war was over. The usurpers were gone. And for the first time in 25 years, the house didn't just have an owner, it had a home. Thank you so much for listening to this story of justice and reclamation. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening from a busy city, a quiet countryside, or maybe even your own secret garden? Please let me know in the comments below so we can connect. If you enjoyed seeing Freya take back what was hers, please subscribe to the channel Monica Revenge Stories, hit that like button, and smash the hype button to help this story reach more people who need a reminder that the truth never sleeps.